Hey, what's happening, Next Level listeners? In this episode, I'll sit down with Kelly Brogan, MD, and talk on the truth about medication and healing depression naturally. We'll also dive into topics like Kelly's first wake-up call while writing prescriptions, what happened when she was faced with an illness and realizing she didn't want to take the medication for the rest of her life, how we only learn through lived experience, some astounding facts about the psychopharmacology industry, the need for reinvention in medicine and science, the courtship that happens in the pharmaceutical companies, and so much more. In Kelly's new book, A Mind of Your Own, she really unpacks the industry, she unpacks psychopharmacology, and she really dispels a lot of myths around depression and mental disease in general, and how it's been. One of the other things, too, that I love in here, you talk about the serotonin theory of depression and how that's potentially a myth, or that is a myth. And can you unpack that a little bit? You go into it in your book, but I think that, for our listeners especially, anyone that's dealt with depression or deals with depression knows that you go somewhere and basically you get a drug for it. And that's based on the science that there's maybe somehow some kind of deficiency in serotonin or some excess serotonin, whatever way they paint it, right?
Right. So we really told the story, right, about what depression is, and we're told that it's something you're probably born with, even though there's no science to substantiate that claim. But we're just going to assume that it's a genetic problem, and that it manifests at some point in your life as a chemical imbalance, which of course needs to be corrected with chemicals. Makes sense. And then, some clinicians might even go so far as to say it's kind of like if you needed eyeglasses, you probably would need them for the rest of your life, or it's kind of like if you needed insulin as a diabetic, you can't go without it, right? Mm-hmm. So, in this way, a legitimate medical discipline was born from nothing, because psychiatry has been really working for decades to develop some sense of scientific legitimacy and to take on a more biological, sort of framework. Of course, there were doctors frothing at the mouth, to be able to say that they were practicing real scientific medicine that required not just psychoanalysis, but of course required chemicals to treat their patients. And so, really it's very humble origins of the serotonin myth, and really seems to be traced back to a hypothetical paper by this guy, Joseph Schildkraut, in the 50s. And then the observation that anti-tuberculosis medications might have mood-related effects, and they were known to impact the MAO enzyme, a monoamine oxidase enzyme. And so there was really some deductive reasoning applied that essentially left us with the assumption that chemicals in our brain, specifically serotonin, might have anything to do with the experience of depression, and that depression is actually a thing, right? So my concern is that we should really just start there, right? Because it's my belief, and really based on my unpacking of the research, that depression isn't a thing. It's not a disease the way that we have been told it is, and it's certainly not a discrete entity that manifests similarly from one person to another. So a lot of what I focus on is, well, you might be calling something depression, or somebody might be telling you that you're depressed and you need these chemicals, but would you really want to treat, a reversible physiologic problem like low thyroid function or blood sugar imbalance or specific food intolerance? Or how about, a side effect from another medication you haven't been informed about, whether it's birth control or acid blocking pills? Would you really want to treat any of those situations with Zoloft or Prozac when you could reverse them at the root? Because they could all be called depression, because depression is really a label you can get after taking a 4-minute quiz on WebMD, or after a 10-minute appointment with your family practice doctor. And we know statistically that almost 3/4 of people taking antidepressants don't even meet psychiatric criteria, which of course could be debated in and of itself, but they don't even meet psychiatric criteria for major depression. So we're using these pills as a panacea, right? We use them if your dog died, if you have an eating disorder, if you have a phobia, if you have anxiety, if your job sucks. Basically this is how it's really the only currency that many stressed and overburdened doctors in our very broken system have to help patients, or at least so they think. right? So your doctors are not bad people, right? And the only tool that they feel they have is to offer you a prescription, to take the edge off, to help you through it, to even acknowledge your struggle or suffering. And women are prescribed more than double the rate that men are for a number of reasons, but it's also because so much of what they're presenting with, in my opinion, is interpreted in, something of a dismissive, misogynistic manner, where it's, oh, you're just worrying too much, or, oh, you're just overworked or overwhelmed, and here's something you should do for yourself. Go ahead and take a prescription. When the reality is that, our experience of what we are calling depression, by the way, so many other mental illnesses, is a very understandable and maybe even natural and normative response to what is called in the literature evolutionary mismatch, right? Which is this idea that we are living in environments, in lifestyles, in mindsets that are totally incompatible with, millions of years of evolution that have brought us mind, body, and spirit to expect a certain experience that we are just not having. And so depression is like the non-specific manifestation of your body's attempt to adapt, right? So it certainly has a role. It's like an important message when you look at it from this perspective.